Welcome to another episode of Leaders Lane. I'm really excited to bring to you our guest today. Her name is Erin Herman. She's a keynote speaker, consultant, writer, and workshop facilitator. And for the past 20 years, she's worked with executive teams across the globe, including Fortune 500 companies, to lead change and create a change that actually sticks, which is something that we all want to achieve in our leadership. But her leadership career has taken her from the boardrooms of St. Jude's Children's Hospital to the global halls of the United Nations. And she's built partnerships that have created a lasting impact, like securing a $300 million commitment to support pediatric research. And it was one of the largest gifts made to the Children's Hospital. One of the projects she's most proud of is the Learning Passport, and it's a digital education platform she co-created with Microsoft and Cambridge University. It now reaches children in more than 40 countries and was named one of Time's 100 best inventions. I think that's majorly impressive, so I'm excited to welcome Erin to the conversation. Hi, Erin. Thank you for joining me.
Hi, Monica. Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Amazing. So, as I've just shared with everyone, you have a very impressive career. I do want to find out, how did your leadership journey begin?
Yeah, definitely. I actually started my career in elevator and escalator sales after I graduated college. So I was quite literally paid to help people move up in the world. And I had a lot of fun with that job. I mean, it was a great sales opportunity for me. I ended up working my way up through the company and living in Finland and China and working on different international projects. And so that gave me a really nice international space and viewpoint on the world and just working with so many different cultures and contexts. And from there, I knew I had always wanted to work for the United Nations. But quite frankly, I thought, man, who is going to take a shot on a kid from Wisconsin? Global impact was not really a topic of discussion at the dinner table. And so I wasn't really sure how to even get my foot in the door. And I went through some things in my life and I thought, we build confidence by doing things. We don't wait till we're ready and then push the button. And so I just took a shot and I reached out to a couple board members on the national board for the United Nations Children's Fund. And I just shared my story and my qualifications because I think so many times in life, we get so dialed into the fact that we need to be perfect or we need to have all these credentials or we need to be somebody we're not. And sometimes I just think when we're authentic and we're real and we're vulnerable and we share why we want to be, at that table and have a seat at the table, I think people are willing to listen. And so I did that through LinkedIn. I started getting connected with individuals within the organization. And long story short, I ended up working for the United Nations Children's Fund for 7 years, leading their corporate partnership team, which was amazing. And I had the opportunity to meet so many different, Fortune 500 CEOs to politicians to, traveling the world. It was an amazing job. And then I ended up wanting a new challenge. And so I went over to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, 𝐼SAC, and led their corporate partnership team. And that was a really nice experience. That was more domestic focused partnerships. And so I really was able to mix the best of both worlds between international development and domestic partnerships. And I went through a point, Monica, in my life where my father had passed away and I was still doing the same work that I had done for several years. And it really presented an opportunity to me because I think we as individuals, we always say, oh, we'll get to that tomorrow. We'll pursue our passion when I've got time. Well, what better time than now? What better time than the present? And so I walked in one day and I said, hey, I'm hanging it up and I want to go share my messages about change management and self-assurance and the beautiful nature of failure and failing first, because I think perfection's overrated and women playing big in the workspace. And I dove head in and I've been a keynote speaker ever since. And I absolutely love what I do.
That's such a beautiful journey, and I'm sure it's come with many challenges along the way. I'll start sort of at the beginning. When you originally jumped on LinkedIn to reach out to the people that you wanted to connect with to potentially share your story, what was that experience like for you? Because I know that for some people that would be the most scariest thing to do. Do you feel like it's in your personality that you just are like, what have I got to lose? I'm going to give this a go. Or what was your process there?
Yeah, no, I love that question. I think that everybody in life, it doesn't matter who you are, if you are, you know, just leaving high school and you're going into college, if you're just about to get your first job, if you are 65 years old and you've worked in the same career for your entire life, I think everybody deserves to live a life that they feel proud of and that they feel accomplished by and that they feel like they took enough risks to reap the rewards. And when I say that, it doesn't mean just being a complete game changer. It just truly means putting yourself out there and seeing where you land, because the worst thing that can happen is people say, no, you're not the right fit. Or, hey, I appreciate your interest, but this isn't going to work. But think about those times when they say yes. And you will never experience the taste of yes if you don't put the risk of that reward out there. And what I just will add one caveat on that, but women in particular, when women are elevated within the workspace, it's statistically proven that they elevate 10 other women along with them. So I just encourage all of your female listeners to look at their friends, look at their social circle. You only need one in order to elevate the rest of you. And I think that's the beauty and the power of presence and authentic living and pursuing your dreams.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. There's a special magic that happens amongst women when they are elevated and then they can take someone else on the journey with them. Because I think, at least with the women that I know that I surround myself with, there's a level of championing the other one. It's like, yes, you can do this. And we all go through different stages where, maybe I might be losing my self-confidence in a particular area, but I'll say, hey, Erin, like, this is what I'm feeling. You'll be like, no, you've got this, like, look at this. And you'll give me a different perspective to look at things through. And so you help me rise. And then maybe in a few weeks' time, you might come to me and say, hey, Monica, I'm really struggling with this. I can't do this anymore. And I'll be like, yes, you can. And I think that's the power of connecting with women that also want to empower those around them.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree. And, you hit it on the head, but I talk about this concept of sometimes you have to utilize someone else's belief within you before you can ignite your own. And that is not a shaming tactic. That's actually a really empowering tactic to utilize, because we only see a reflection of ourselves, whereas others are showing us the true representation of our potential. And so when you get those affirmations from your friends or your colleagues, it can do wonders for your self-confidence.
Yeah, totally. Excuse me. So tell me about your moment where you thought, no, I've had this incredible career so far, but now I want to go out and share my message. Now, how did you know what your message was? And what was that journey of refining it and creating it and bringing it to the world?
Yeah. So when I resigned, I knew I wanted to be, a keynote speaker and dive into my messages, but I didn't know how. No one has ever taught me, hey, this is the steps, A, B, and C as to how to become a keynote speaker. So anyways, I had just gotten done hearing another phenomenal keynote speaker, Kristen Hadid, who's pretty well known on the keynote speaking circuit. She speaks on human leadership, igniting human leadership. And anyways, I dropped Kristen a line and I said, hey, will you mentor me? Here is my story. I'm just a woman that lives in Kansas and here's my bio. Will you just give me 30 minutes of your time? I just want to pick your brain. And I sent this email off to her. And honestly, Monica, I didn't think I was going to hear anything from her. I mean, she's got several thousand followers. I thought, again, it was just one of those risks of putting yourself out there. And so a few days later, I get an email back from Kristen and she says, hey, Erin, I think this is actually a really opportune time for us to connect. And I thought, well, that's great. We're going to jump on the phone. This is exciting. She's like, I would actually really like you to come to my house for a week. We are putting together a keynote speaker engagement deep dive session for people with your similar background that are, mid career and pursuing their passions and have been within that executive space. And so, I'm reading this email and I look up at my husband and I say, oh my gosh, this woman wants me to come to her house. That's kind of scary. I want, I don't know what's going to happen. And I just leaned in and I said yes. I think that's the one thing that if I could share anything with any listener is I literally try and say yes to everything at least 99% of the time, even if it scares the hell out of me, because there is just so much reward once we just open the door. So I said yes. I jumped on a flight. I had never met this woman outside of hearing her speak once. And I just remember ringing her doorbell being like, okay, here goes nothing. And there was 3 other speakers with me that had joined, and we were all strangers on day one. But I share this story because it was just the most beautiful and articulate week of, hey, this is the message I want to talk about. And I knew I wanted to talk about messages that just resonate with me, that I really believe in. They're not catchy. They're not grabby. I mean, change management is probably the least sexy topic you can talk about. But what I love about my keynote is that I make it funny. I make it inspiring. I talk about everything you should never do, which I've probably done, and then talk about, hey, these are the tactics and the methods and the ways in which to drive true organizational change and level up the work that you all are currently producing. So anyways, that week was just a beautiful opportunity for us to hone and develop our messages. And we all spoke about different topics and just forged beautiful friendship along the way. And leaving that week, Monica, I just knew this is the right space for me. I remember being on stage and we were running through our keynotes. And when I got off stage, somebody said to me, hey, Erin, you are a phenomenal storyteller. Your stories just captivate the room. And for me, my response was, well, they're just real life. But it was amazing to hear how people felt so connected just through simply sharing your story.
I love that because I also advocate for storytelling and using your everyday stories in like everything that you do in business, not just, necessarily a keynote, but even if you're talking on social media and sharing those stories, I think they land differently. I think there's so much information coming at everybody that the differentiating factor is you and then how you tell the story. And you can infuse, whatever your business is about or your message is about, you can infuse that into the storytelling. And I was reading a few of your posts last night on LinkedIn as well, and I just could feel you through them. And I'm big on that because I think the landscape, especially with AI now, it can be a little bit bland. And I think it gives people like yourself to stand out, and then it's easy to find your people that can help create that change because they're using their voice. So I think that's really beautiful.
Yeah, I think, I love LinkedIn because when I scroll LinkedIn, you see the full gamut of, professional accolades to photos to, the latest and greatest updates from your favorite corporations. But I think for me, what has brought such a joyful element is just sharing about my life, sharing what I'm going through, whether it's talking about, my children, whether it's talking about an upcoming event, whether it's talking about, hey, this is what I completely failed at this week, but at least I put myself out there. And for me, I always find inspiration in other people's events. And, sometimes it's their missteps, sometimes it's their impact. But for me, both have a special place in my heart. I talk a little bit in my keynotes about strength and weakness, right? And I always lean to the fact that strong people, they notice other people's strengths. Weak people notice other people's weaknesses. Strong people can take someone's shortcoming and learn from it, whereas weak people will take someone's shortcoming and laugh about it. And at the end of the day, when we remove envy and we take that out and we just show up authentic and we learn to study one another, we encourage appreciation, admiration, support for one another. And I think the best way to do that is to just be who you are and really real and honest and share up front, hey, this is all that I bring to the table, good, bad, and indifferent.
Tell me a little bit about the resistance that sometimes we face when we do come to bring more of ourselves to the table, because I think that's an evolutionary process. Like I've found the more I've accepted myself, accepted the good things, the things I don't like, the things I can work on, the easier it is for me to show up for myself and my message. And when I have conversations with people, a lot of them are still at that stage where they're saying, oh, but I don't know what to talk about. And they still don't believe in their story and the value that it has. So can you shed some light on the resistance part?
Yeah. No, I love the topic of resistance, because I think resistance is oftentimes mislabeled as a roadblock, and it's truly not a roadblock. In my experience, leading international teams, growing businesses, navigating personal pivots in my professional and personal life, it's a flare. It's something within your soul, your mind, your body saying, hey, this needs a deeper look. Okay. It needs you to lift the lid open and identify, is this a belief? Is this a fear? Is this, an invitation to look deeper? And oftentimes it's just an invitation to look deeper into what the data is showing you, because I ultimately think resistance shows up as data in our life. And it's not something that we need to bulldoze through. In fact, we need to sit with it, and we need to look at what's out of alignment and how do we course correct. I'll say every time that I personally have felt resistance in my life, whether I'm writing a new keynote and I'm about to deliver it on stage for the very first time, or I've taken a role that I felt underqualified for, I'll say that I was always on the brink of expansion, but I just needed to figure out how to embrace myself in the process. And for me, that is a very positive element of resistance. Don't numb the signal, just decode it, is really what I would say.
I think that's such a beautiful way to look at it, because there is a lot of information saying that, oh, if you're feeling that resistance, it's something saying that this isn't right for you, this isn't the right opportunity. And I had an interesting experience of that for myself as well, somewhat recently. So I started learning I got my pilot license 4 years ago. And I was then doing my commercial pilot studies last year, and there was a lot of theory, and it didn't come easily to me. It was all like topics and numbers, and I'm not a numbers person. And I remember feeling this resistance, and I failed a few exams, and I just thought, maybe I can't do this. Maybe this isn't for me. Maybe I'm not smart enough. Like, I just can't seem to get this. And anytime I was procrastinating, I caught myself and I go, okay, why are you really feeling this resistance? And it wasn't that I couldn't do it. It was just that I was afraid that maybe I wouldn't be able to. I wasn't going to be able to learn the thing. And once I had that realization, anytime I pushed up against that resistance, I was like, oh, there's that feeling again. And you're just on the edge. You're about to expand. And it's like, break it down. What's the first step you can do in this topic, So I think in what you shared, it's like decoding what is the resistance about, and what's maybe the one step that you can take to ease it or open yourself up to what's next.
I love that. I mean, I think you hit it on the head. It's resistance ultimately shows up as two elements, either procrastination or perfectionism. There's no element in between those two. When, to your point, when you say, hey, what's underneath all of this, that discomfort could ultimately be your next direction, your next move. It's just embracing that discomfort and saying, all right, I'm ready to step into it. Exactly what you did with your pilot's license. I commend you for that. And I will say too, when you're thinking about solo entrepreneurs, right? I think the fear there, or the resistance, if you will, is just you're allowing yourself to be seen in a whole new light. Like, the visibility on you is tremendous, right? And so I don't think in those avenues that criticism is there. I think that needs to be met with charisma and confidence and kindness, because solo entrepreneurs, when they really put themselves out there, that veil that everyone lives behind, you're the number one employee in that organization. And so that's the type of leadership that just deserves compassion over criticism. So all elements of resistance.
What is your take on confidence? Do you feel like it's something that's inherent, or do you think it's something that we build? I'm curious.
Yeah, I think it's definitely, I like to give a statistic. So women, when we are applying for various roles that, let's say, we either believe we are qualified for or aren't qualified for, women will not apply for that role until they feel that they meet 100% of the qualifications. Now, men will apply for that same role if they think they meet 60% of the qualifications. And to me, what that shows is this, everyone talks about imposter syndrome a little bit. And I think women, we have a tendency to lean into that a little bit more, but I don't think that's an internal problem. I think that's a response to external invalidation. And so the more that we can sponsor women, the more that we can validate women, the more I think we can break down the fears of imposter syndrome and build active confidence. For me, I think confidence is inherent. You don't secure confidence just by saying, okay, I'm confident. You do it by putting yourself out there, by doing the hard thing, by being uncomfortable. And that, through practice, builds confidence day in and day out. And pretty soon you build this shield, if you will, of just embracing anything that can come your way, knowing that you've got the self-assurance to navigate through whatever challenges or obstacles meet you. And that in turn raises your confidence level to take on new challenges and do hard things.
Did you, when you first started speaking, were you confident? Were you naturally not so much afraid of being a speaker, or did you have to practice? Because I've watched some of your stuff online and you have this beautiful presence on stage. And I mean, it's the same presence that you're bringing to this conversation now, but when you are on stage, it's almost you're on a stage. So it's a different type of dynamic environment. What was that like for you?
Yeah, I think the very first time I ever took a stage, I thought I was going to just pass out. It was like every message I had in my mind went blank, and, the room was only about 50% full. And I thought, oh my gosh, how do people get up here and do this? Monica, for me, what changed in that moment, that fight or flight, my heart's beating so fast, I wasn't sure if I needed to take some heart medication or just step off the stage, was I thought, I've got a really important message to share. And for me, it's about the mission. And when I recognize that my message matters and that my mission matters, I had every right to be in that room. And if I can share that message with at least one person in that room that identifies with it and says, you know what, let me take a look at my life. Let me see if I can do something different. Let me see if I feel inspired to challenge the status quo or live the best possible life that I can live. If I can touch somebody with my messages of self-insurance or not being so hard on yourselves about making mistakes, really everyday things that I don't think we realize we have in our toolkit of possibility, then to me, that there's no greater serving purpose than that. That's how I've continued to show up on stage. Every time I pass out, I just remember that.
That's beautiful. And thanks for being so honest and candid about it too. I think it gives people that, someone that might be looking to follow in your footsteps, it gives them that hope or that courage to go, oh, well, if Erin can do it, I can do it too. And, we each have our own processes in terms of little obstacles that we overcome on our own journeys in building our businesses and putting ourselves out there. So just because it's harder for one person, someone else might find it easier. Other times, it's just something that you work on and become better at as you go along.
Yeah, I love that. I think, and that goes along, the lines of leadership, right? When you're a solo entrepreneur, you're leading a global team of, 400 or 500 people. I think is, looking in my own lens, I think the biggest mistake I made starting out as a leader or a keynote speaker, you name it, whatever role I've stepped into, when I first started out in those spaces, I thought I had to show up and be perfect. I thought I had to say the right things. I thought I needed to have all of the right answers. But Monica, what happened is perfectionism made me defensive, and it made me actually alienate everybody that I wanted to work with and work well with. And it kept me from ultimately, I think, receiving help. And once I got over that need to be perfect or the smartest person in the room, I think it afforded me the ability to become the leader, the individual that I always wanted to be and that I knew I was capable of being. I just had to do some self-realization in the process to get to that point.
I agree with you. I think that being able to lead ourselves and then to lead others, very much that inner reflection, because once we sort of can look at the parts of ourselves, like you were saying, for you, it was perfection, and I can relate. I've had many instances where I want to do something perfectly. And as you were just talking, then I was thinking, with perfection, is it perfection because we want to do the thing perfect, or is it perfection because we don't want to be perceived a certain way by somebody outside of us? And maybe that's multi-layered. I'm not sure. It's just come to me right now as we're talking. But yeah, I think that self-reflection, self-awareness piece is what makes a really good leader, because it gives you that capacity to go hear what other people have to say, you know, whether it's something that you want to hear or something you don't want to hear.
Right.
Like you were saying so beautifully, the perfection closes us off from that. So the self-awareness piece, I think, opens us up back to it.
And I think it's really important with solo entrepreneurs, when you own your own business, right? You have got to be your own boss, but you're also your own critic. And I think it's so important to be kind to yourself. Treat yourself with grace, with dignity, with discipline, with vision. But don't forget that grace piece, because you're showing up and you're putting yourself out there, and you've got a lot of pressure on yourself to succeed. There's no one else in your corner besides yourself. You know, you're the one keeping the lights on. And I think that's what serves itself when you look at purpose and strategy, right? If you have purpose, you can motivate a team. If you have purpose, you can motivate yourself. And through purpose, you build strategy that sticks.
I'm so aligned with that. My three main ways that I work with clients is through purpose, clarity, and power. So I love that you said that, because I feel it really does start with purpose. Once you have that piece, everything else can roll out more effortlessly than if you didn't have that initial intentional, why am I doing this? Who am I? All those questions.
Right. I think when you have a team, you know, when I talk about change management, right? Organizations are putting in new leaders, they're changing strategy. There's so many things that are happening. And I think that is an essential time to reconnect to purpose, not only as a leader, but reminding your teams, hey, why are you here? Why are you showing up? Why'd you take this job in the first place? And I really encourage leaders, at least on a quarterly or a monthly basis when they're going through change, to just put a meeting on the books all about purpose and say, guys, are we showing up today because we have to be here, because this metric is important, or because you're choosing to be here? And recirculate the discussion on purpose, because when people feel seen, safe, valued, supported, and they're serving the mission, they're that much more apt to stay in the game with you when things get tough. And every organization, every team, they're going to experience those tough moments. But you've got to make sure that you've got players on your team that are going to stay in the game with you and support you. And that's so important to reconnect to purpose. Because I've seen, Monica, and I've been guilty of this myself. You come in, you want to make a big name for yourself, you want to do big things and post big results, but you can throw strategy after strategy after strategy at the team. 90% of the time, you're probably going to burn the team out, or you're going to burn yourself out in the process. But it's the simple things that we overlook, like the conversations about purpose or about why they're here and the mission they're serving, that ultimately anchor the strategy that you're trying to drive home.
So I'm curious to know, when you go into an organization to support them with change, where are you sort of entering it, or is it different? Like, so are they companies that are having serious issues with culture and they're bringing you in to help create a better culture and a more purposeful, aligned workplace? Or is it also companies that they've got a pretty good culture, their leadership teams are pretty good, then they're wanting to improve?
I think that's a great question. I like to do both. I like to do both talks, and they take on different forms, right? Because I think about those organizations where they're going through major changes. They're probably experiencing a lot of resistance. I think certain managers, they're going to see that as, insubordination instead of insight, right? And so you're going to get those tough organizations where you've got the tough conversations, and I help really bring those gritty topics to life. And I offer methodologies and tactics to think differently about that feedback and that information to help them lead better and more authentically through those difficult moments. And then we've got the organizations where, hey, things are pretty good, but what about if we did this? What about if we leveled up our work? What results could happen? And I think that goes back to those courageous conversations, those big moments of confidence where, it's probably not backed in anything, but we're going to put ourselves out there and just think about the results that we can achieve. And so when I think about fulfillment and why I do what I do, my cup gets filled from both sides of the house.
Yeah, awesome. And if someone's listening right now and they're running a team or a company and they're thinking, okay, maybe I need someone like Erin to come in to talk to us, before, say, calling someone like yourself in, what would be one thing that's a great starting point for them to something to start with? I know you mentioned purpose, like putting a meeting on the books, but is there anything else that they could apply?
Yeah, definitely. So I think, and this is so basic, but I talk about this from a personal perspective and from a professional perspective. We've all been in those organizations, right, where groupthink happens. And groupthink is really risky when you have an organization going through significant changes. Groupthink can become negative really quickly. And when you have negativity and you're going through those changes, that's even more difficult, right? So one thing I do, and I've done with a lot of my teams, is I do the 3-5-7 rule. And what that means is I'm going to take a thought and we all sit around the room and we say, hey, what's on your mind? And it's really interesting, Monica, to see who is sharing insights or thoughts or feedback that's positive versus others that are sharing a lot of concerns. And we say, okay, Jenny, give me your rundown on how your week was. What's the most pressing thing that popped up, or what are you most proud of? Through those thoughts, I then ask the team, all right, rephrase that 3 times. So if it's a negative thought that, oh God, the organization's going to shut their doors, or this is plaguing me with anxiety, I switch that narrative and I say, give me a secondary thought that's a positive outlook on what you just said instead of a concerned or an anxious outlook. And I ask Jenny to do it 3 times. And then I'll say, now I want you to do it 5 times and then 7 times. And it's really interesting. And it totally blows up groupthink. It completely capitalizes on possibility instead of pessimism. And you're able to get people to think outside the box just within that meeting. And then other people start participating or throwing out ideas and saying, well, what about instead of thinking about this doomsday situation in this way, we thought about it in this way. So then people start to support one another in the room. That's just a great 3-5-7 exercise where it stimulates group discussion. It creates possibilities instead of problems. And it gets people pulled out of what is present day, and it gets them thinking about potential for future opportunities and ways in which to show up. But I've got a whole slew of different tactics and tips and tricks to really support organizations, because these are crucial times and they can be very difficult and very daunting. And that's why I love to come in and help open people's perspectives and say, hey, implement this. Tell me how it's working. The other thing that I like to do after my keynotes is to have a couple of facilitation workshops, one to just check in and see how were the ideas that I threw out. Did they stick? What are you noticing as potential opportunities and landmines? What's still not working? How can we course correct? And so we do that through a series of workshops after the keynotes as well to really make those messages and that impact stick.
Well, I haven't actually heard of that before, so it was really interesting to see. But one thing I do know is that when you have that perspective shift just for yourself, it's your mind opens to opportunities. So I can imagine doing that activity in a group of people that maybe have a tendency to go towards negative groupthink at that point in time. I can see how it's a ripple effect. One person opens their mind than the other one, and it's just an energetic change amongst everybody. And I think it's just such beautiful and powerful work that you are bringing to these different teams and organizations.
Thank you. Yeah, I love it because it also ties back to the fact that we all are going through the same things, right? Reality is reality. We're all going through the same thing. We're all going through change, or we're trying to teach women how to play bigger, or we're trying to develop that self-assurance that we all want to have, that inner voice, right? Our reality is all the same, but our perceptions of reality differ significantly. And so it's on us to learn the tools as leaders or the heads of organizations or on ourselves individually if we're trying to become more self-assured as to how we can change our perception on reality so that our image and our reality line up. And that can be a really cohesive, effective thing that I love to help people put in play.
Can you tell me a little bit about the 𝐾𝐨𝐬 method?
Yeah, I love talking about the 𝐾𝐨𝐬 method because oftentimes people are like, oh, good, here's the narrative on a great college party. And I definitely have loved the parties back in the day. But the 𝐾𝐨𝐬 method came about because as I was sitting in several boardrooms with Fortune 500 executives, day in and day out, working at UNICEF, ideating on potential partnerships to help the most marginalized children in the world, I noticed these three distinct qualities that just kept presenting themselves over and over and over in every single room. And I took those qualities and I built them into a methodology that I talk about. And I talk about this methodology often, but essentially the methodology evolves around courage, empathy, and a growth mindset. And courage is really the cost of putting ourselves out there, of showing up differently, of being able to be the leader we always wanted to, but we didn't know how to show up to be. And I tell some very real and pointed stories about building trust and validation and vulnerability that all lead up to courage. And then I talk about empathy. And we think about empathy in a very traditional sense in our society and within our professional networks. But I encourage audiences to think about empathy not as caring about somebody, but caring for somebody. And what does that mean? It means, making sure that employees, when they come into the workspace, they're not just showing up to do their job. They feel genuinely within every ounce of their being that my manager supports me. They know my family. They know my kids. They know what I'm going through personally and professionally. They care about me. They know that the work that I'm working on, the metrics I'm developing, the results that I'm generating, they all tie back to the mission and they matter. People want to feel like they matter. And I think that is such an overlooked element in today's workspace. And so we really dive into how do we build empathy? And I give a narrative about a garden and how the employees are essentially the plants. And we as leaders, we are the water, and the organization is the soil that helps them grow. And it's such a basic concept, but it's so relatable to what we see in today's workspace. And then I talk about growth. And this is my favorite of the three to talk about because growth is simple. It requires one thing: discomfort. And if you can embrace discomfort, you will be successful at anything you do, whether it's stepping into a new role, building friendships, forging relationships at work. If you can embrace the discomfort, you will be successful. And we talk about building discomfort by celebrating failures, by embracing challenges, all of these things that people are fearful of. But once you realize that fear is just a learning lesson in disguise, an opportunity to redevelop who you are, those are the beautiful moments in work that I appreciate the most. I always tell my kids, hey, what'd you fail at this week? And they're like, Mom, why do you ask that question? That's such a weird question. And I said, well, because your answer to that question is what you're going to remember from this week. You're not going to remember the win or the basketball game where you shot and scored 40 points, but you're going to remember where you tripped up. And then my second question to that is, how are you going to implement that feedback? And it's amazing to see their little brains at 6 and 11 talk to me about how they're going to curb what they learned, whether it's, I know how to use my scissors better because I accidentally cut my finger, to, hey, I learned how to be a good friend on the playground and what to do and not to do and how to embrace friendships. That is where we learn our biggest lessons.
It's such a powerful two-part questioning that you're doing with your kids. I love it so much. I might give it a go with my nephews as well. But it is, I think so often we look at the failure and sometimes we don't stop to go, well, what did I actually get out of this? Mm-hmm. And I love the part where you say, well, what am I going to implement? Because it's easy to even and I probably do this too. It's easy to look at the failure or the thing we didn't, like what happened. But how often do we stop to go, okay, well, how can I implement that in whatever way, so it doesn't happen again, or so that I deliver it better, or, something like that. So I think that's something really tangible and easy that our listeners can stop and reflect on first and then implement into their lives from today on if they choose to.
Yeah. And, I would say relinquish the shame and guilt that comes with failure. I talk about so many failures in my keynote and so many times where I could have rewritten something, restated something, had a conversation differently. But I am so grateful for all of those experiences now. I would not change one of them because they shaped me into who I am and the messages in which I deliver. So I just encourage your listeners to relinquish the shame and guilt and embrace the learning lessons along the way, because they will make all of us better people in the long run. And that's ultimately what we're striving for.
Is there a way that for yourself that you've relinquished the shame and guilt? What's that process been like for you?
Yeah, for me, I've embraced it. And I realized that, in completely real talk, I've been, misunderstood in organizations, been underestimated. I've been, probably the most disliked person from time to time. But what I've taken out of that experience is that I've had plenty of moments where I've had those flaws show up. But I've also had moments where I think I've made beautiful mentorship and commitments to my employees to help them grow in their careers. And I've been the shoulder that they've leaned on when they needed support, or they needed that safety or that reassurance or that validation. And for me, that came full circle when I realized that we as leaders, we don't need to be flawless. We just need to show up and we need to be consistent. And through that, when we embrace both our failures and our accolades, we're human. And people want to work for people that are human. They don't want to work for people that are perfect. And through that thought process, I've been able to accept just who I am and all that I am on both sides of the house. And that feels pretty good. It's been a journey for sure.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, thank you for sharing those things so humanly, so genuinely, because I think it's easy to sometimes not want to show those messy parts of ourselves. I'm not saying that what you were sharing was messy, but sometimes it's like, oh, I can't show that part of myself because people will think differently of me. But I know in my experience, when I read stories or hear stories where people do share, the bits that maybe they don't want everyone to see, but they do share them. It's like, I see myself in that, or
Mm-hmm.
I find a point that I relate to. And I think most people probably don't sit there and judge that person for it. If it's a genuine share, they're thinking, oh, how does this relate to me? How does this impact me? Yes. Oh my God, I did that too. Or, and I think that then creates that connection that we all so want to have in the world, like that real connection.
Right. Right. And I would just also say when you do create those real connections, whether it's friendships, whether it's work colleagues that become family, there's nothing more fulfilling in life. At the end of the day, we all want to be cared for, accepted for who we are, acknowledged for the work that we do, considered for our kindness and our support of one another. And it all starts with just taking back the veil and saying, this is who I am, accept me for who I am, and I'll accept you for who you are. And showing up as your messy self and your professional self all in one.
So our conversation is coming to a close, but I'd just like to check, is there anything that I haven't asked you about that you would really love our listeners to know about?
I would just encourage your listeners to connect with me on LinkedIn and Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. I will share all my handles with you, and hopefully we can put them up. But I would love to come speak on any of the topics that I've discussed. I would also just say that I appreciate your time today. I know that you've got, a lot of different individuals to put on your podcast and to have these conversations with. And I just really have enjoyed our conversation and would love to connect with your audience and share more and speak at organizations that are open and engaged in my mission. I think I can really make a difference.
Thank you for your kind words. And yeah, definitely. I will put all of your links in the show notes. And I've got an amazing QR code that I will also put out on social media and in my newsletter. And I highly recommend anyone listening, if you do want Erin to come into your organization and create some positive waves of change, then you'll be able to reach out to her through those links. And hopefully someone in Australia would like to bring you down, because before the chat we were saying that it's on Erin's bucket list to come to Australia. So if that's you, please reach out to her.
Yes, that's number one, Monica. That's number one for sure.
Okay, so before we do wrap up, I have 4 Leaders Lane sprint questions for you, and they're just quick fire answers.
Let's do it.
So the first question is, what's one of the best experiences you've had in life?
Oh gosh. I think one of the best experiences I've had was doing that speakers retreat with 4 complete strangers and just totally embracing authenticity and vulnerability and seeing the beautiful connections that come from it.
Awesome. And what's one thing that you would like to attempt before you die?
I would love to speak at every Fortune 500 company across the topics that I deliver. And for me, it is the opportunity to see people after the event and hear them say, hey, thanks for making me think differently or show up differently. Just being able to touch one person in every organization would be an ultimate goal for me.
Beautiful. Tell me, who or what brings out your best?
I think my family brings out my best in me. They hold me accountable. They encourage me to be the best version of myself. My children, I think, look up to me and the authenticity that I bring. My daughter once, I'll just share a funny side story, but she said to me, she's 11 now, and she said, Mom, I know that girls can be bosses, but can men be bosses too? And it's funny for me to see how we influence those that are around us in such profound and prevalent ways. And they're always watching. So just continue to show up and to lead with strength. And I think your true abilities will shine through.
That's such a lovely, lovely little story. And my final question for you, and I feel like you sort of answered this before, but what was the one thing that you enjoyed most about our conversation?
I just enjoyed the real conversation. Just not having anything scripted and just really being able to explore, I think, real topics that affect so many of us that probably just need to be discussed out in the open more than not. And being able to take that feedback and that information and thinking about how we can make it applicable to our own lives and what we're going through. Because we're all going through things. And it is ultimately just how we put that perception on our reality and show up the way in which we authentically want to be.
Well, thank you for your time, because I really enjoyed chatting with you. It was just refreshing. It was just sitting down, like having a chit chat. And they are my favorite conversations, because I think people just relate better, to when it's that sort of real, genuine conversation, people relate. They're like, oh, yeah, this is refreshing. I don't need to be anyone to come and listen to this conversation. I can just be myself. So I hope that that's what you've experienced listening, my listeners. And Erin, thank you again for joining me. It's been such an honor to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.